This thing sucks. Is this thing on? It's on. We're live. What is happening, everybody? Everybody's having a fantastic Saturday. If you're watching this on Saturday, chances are your Saturday did not quite go as well as you had hoped. So if y'all were hanging out this, yesterday, I took the car to the drag strip, finally. Drug Revlon to the drag strip in her natural environment, in her element. And man, I gotta tell you, car did really well, all things considered. If you haven't seen it, go to Houston Raceway Park's Instagram page, click on the page or whatever it is, and you'll see a quick video of Little Miss Revlon getting down and putting in some work. First down the track, last down the track last night. That's right. We weren't playing around trying to get some data, so I actually screwed around and jacked up my laptop in the process, but you know, if you're going to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs. So in collecting data and doing some of the stuff I was doing with the car last night, one thing was readily apparent. It is just too damn hot. I mean, look, I get it. It's basically summertime. By the way, for you guys tomorrow that are dads, happy Father's Day. But summertime's basically sitting on top of us, but we have been getting some unrealistically hot temperatures down here, not to mention muggy and everything else. So anyway, tail of the tape, the car ran a best last night of a 1058 at, I don't know, not that much miles per hour because, again, it's super hot. Car was coming out of the hole fine, all things considered, but no matter what you do to the drag strip, when you have temperatures and track temperatures that were basically, I don't know, planet Mercury, I'm guessing, and when you have temperatures like that, there's just no way to really get the car to hook up. Track temps get that hot, track gets greasy, and then it basically becomes a pedal fest. And if you watch the video of the car on HRP's homepage on their Instagram page, I mean, you can kind of hear me pedaling and kind of just feathering the pedal out of the hole. I really wish I could have stood on it, but not her best showing. But she looked good on the launch, and that's the most important thing. Out the back door, that was the very first pass of the night, and that was a 1072 or something like that, at like 127-ish miles per hour. So couldn't really expect too much out of her last night. Running pump gas. One thing I was looking at is I wanted to get the car in about the worst conditions I could possibly find for the car and just see what the car would run. And I wanted bad conditions. I wanted it to be hot. I wanted it to be muggy. I wanted it to be on pump gas. Greasy track helped too. And all of those conditions, I mean, it's the worst of the worst of the worst case scenarios. In an environment where you would typically never take your car to the drag strip, took the car to the drag strip. Number one, data collection. Number two, it's seat time. And gotta say, the car did really well. Again, she ran a best of like a 1058 with a few 1060s thrown in there. A couple of instances where she spun, but you know, early on in the day, or I should say early on in the evening, there was just going to be no getting around that. But all things considered, I'm real happy with the way she ran. As far as data goes, so running it on pump gas, the tune that's in the car, it really shouldn't have any real knock retard. But when you've got downstream temperatures that are hovering around 158 or 160 degrees, there's going to be some short-term knock retard being pulled out of the car. And even with the knock sensor settings as not necessarily as aggressive as they are, but they are a little bit aggressive, she was still pulling a little bit of timing, just here and there, primarily about halfway through fifth gear, which was funny in a way because there's no extra timing in this car, especially in that range. And it is what it is. When you've got real hot downstream temperatures, there's just no way to get around it. The car is doing what it can, but it's going to go ahead and pull a little bit of that timing back. Now, as stated, on one of the launches, I had jacked up my laptop, and of course it happens. I don't have it here with me, but it's right at the top left portion of the keypad where you open the thing up, or I'm sorry, the top right where the power button is, right where the USB connection is. Anyway, on one of the launches where it hooked hard, the thing slid back. It was on the floor in front of my passenger seat and smacked the rail, I guess, or something underneath there with that seat, and basically just broke it. So yeah, anyway, I wasn't able to data log some of the later passes, some of the cooler passes, but you could see mile an hour pickup, and DA was coming down. I think that best pass, by the way, if you don't have the HRP Slips app for your phone, go download it. Download the HRP Slips app on any given Friday, car 1122, which is this guy. Just go down there, look for car 1122, and you can see the times. I don't know how long they stay in there, but I know that that's my number, at least on the normal Friday night runs. And of course, if I do a rental or something like that, I'll typically write in the 1122 number. So you guys can keep track of the car. And on the at Moparmageddon, I'm always car 01 or 001. So that'll give you an idea as far as, you know, numbers and things like that. But at any rate, had a good time, got to visit with some folks. Everybody was in a pretty good mood. Most of the people that were there were just glad to be on track. We have had rain for what I can only describe to you as every Friday night. So the thing about it is that I don't know how many Fridays we did get rain, or there was an event or something like that. So if nothing else, a night at the drag strip was just good enough to say you were able to go. So, you know, it's just one of those fun things that, you know, everybody was in kind of a rarefied good mood, even though there was a lot of crazy stuff going on. So, because of that fact that most guys hadn't been on the drag strip in a while, a lot of guys had their cars set to kill. Quite a few breakages. Couldn't really wrap my mind around that, but yeah, normally you start seeing breaks down here, you know, like a string of cars, you know, guys setting their cars to kill, trying to cover a number in, like, I don't know, October, November, maybe the tail end of September, when the temperatures really start coming down and you kind of get in that cool sweet spot where you've got fairly low DA, say like 800-900 feet of DA. But you've got good track, and so a lot of guys will start really throwing the beans to their combinations. Well, we were running into that last night where we would have, I don't know, maybe 25-30 minutes worth of cars going down the track, only to end up having, you know, have it be down for a little bit because of reasons, you know. But at least nobody ran off the backside of the track. At least I don't think so. So anyway, let me check in with you guys real quick, and I'll keep giving you some heads up. Dad's Garage is first in, saying, hey, B, good seeing you. Good seeing you, Dad's Garage. Michael Corleone saying, good evening, Professor Mason. Got the arm flex. I like it. Michael Grove saying, what's up? Dr. Div saying, B. Mason, what's up? What's up, my man? Like it. Dad's Garage said, at least it was nice and cool out there. So, yeah, I'd actually sent Dad's Garage a link to that pass. So it was so... when I did the live show, I don't know if it was readily apparent, but I was sweating just pouring in sweat. And on that live show, I did a ride along. So I always like doing those ride alongs. It's fun. Sovereign Knights in, Nitro Cruise saying, hey, check it out. It's hot out here in NorCal too. I feel your pain, man. I miss NorCal. Sovereign Knights said, damn, I'm late. Saying I was in the pool hot over here in NorCal. Yep. Randy saying, good evening, Mr. M from Middle Tennessee. Liked it. Enjoyed the trip down the track. Very cool. Dr. Dip's asking, what do you think about methanol with a nitrous system for the wet side? Think it would be too much to let. Jesse and I are talking about it for the Thunder Chicken. Man, I don't see any reason for it. You don't need it for charge cooling. That's what nitrous oxide is there for. Atmosphere in a bottle. Um, I I would just say it'd be probably easier to run race gas or just 93 octane, frankly, for that combination, unless you're trying to cheat timing up and things like that. I don't know what that combination will actually manage, but if you're just talking about a 3 or 4 or 2 or 3 gallon standalone cell, I'd say just load it up with. You can go methanol. I just don't like mixing the fuel types. You can always jet it for sure. I don't know. I think you get more bang for your buck if you were to go probably 260 GT or MS 109 would be the way I would go with it. So I'm saying, am I late or early? You're very early. Marco's saying 5.7 Hemi is the best V8. Well, if sales figures would have a part in that, you would be correct. Summer's saying said it was streaming 118 minutes ago. Ooh. Saying just chilling on a Saturday. Saying broke the USB port. Yeah, I broke the one on the right hand side of the computer, right there by the power button. But if I use a pin, like if I get a pin and I do the thing where you just make the thing stick out and basically Pulp Fiction that sucker, I can actually make it work. So. Doc saying he's got a few laptops for just data logging. I'll give you one of them. Cool. Replace yours. But when getting data, just use one of these throwaways. They're perfect for that. Thanks, man. Appreciate that. Might have to take you up on that. B. Rocker saying, good evening. Sovereign saying, that's awesome. PD Foreman's in. What's up, man? Saying, hot as fuck up here. Roulette. Love the streams. Cool. So getting back into it, talking about the trip to the track, I think that pass the live pass I did, I think it was ended up being like a 10:59 or a 10:62 or something like that. I can't remember. The car did good going down the track. It hooked, everything went fine. And that was a good part about it. But, again, a lot of folks earlier on were having a lot of issues, I guess you could say, and just, cars not hooking up. There was a 1320 there, stock no seat car that I don't know if it went in the 11s, but it came damn close. Guy driving it, real nice guy. I think he's got some mods planned for it, but that was a pretty cool deal to see that thing going down the track. Let's see. Some Fryer guy saying, so I just got new Indy 500 Firehawk tires on the 5.0. What's the best cold PSI to have them for best street use? So the Firehawk, I think those are like a 300 tread wear rating. I mean, you'd probably be fine at like 30. I don't typically go under. I know it's kind of weird when you're talking about tires, because I normally just will not go over. It's like, dude, I typically don't go under 27 to 29 cold pressure. In the summertime, I'll cheat. I say I cheat. I bring the tire PSI down maybe a pound or two if I'm going on any long trips or something like that, just because those tires will heat up and you'll gain a couple of more PSI as they heat up. But for just general bombing around, playing around with the car, I just don't like anything less than about 28 to 29. And the reason for that is the contact patch. And I've got my old ruler here, because I get this question a lot, or these types of questions. This is what you're looking for. You're looking for a flat contact patch. You don't want it to bow, because that's what it does when you run low on fuel. And if you run too much, obviously it bows the other direction. Actually, this would be cupping. So cupping and bowing. When you run the lower pressures, you have this, there's a sense that it's going to hook better. And that's not necessarily going to be the case. If you drop that pressure, and I've done pattern testing on this, and I've done it enough to where I've got a pretty decent Rolodex of experience with different tires, and when they're properly sized on the rim. for how they're going to act. So at about 22, let's say 22 to 24 PSI, which is where most guys will run the tires at the track. You run them at 22, 24 cold, you light them up, and you'll see them at like 23, 24 to 24, 26 hot. And they'll have just a slight cup to them, just a little bit. But what you're doing is you're allowing the sidewall to have a little bit of flex in it. That's typically not bad, but those pressures on the street, you'll get a pattern that is in essence I'll turn it this way, two black lines on either side of the tire because the tire is cupping. That problem's made worse if you have a wider tire on a narrow rim, especially if it's a small aspect ratio tire, like a 305/35/20 is the first one that comes to mind. And the reason for that is you've got more bulge. In other words, if this is the width of your rim, that tire is going to have to stick out further. In other words, if it's a 305, it's going to stick out further. If it's a higher aspect ratio, it doesn't matter. Like if the tire's as tall as my hand, it doesn't matter to get to that width. If it's only as tall as my pinky finger, it's got to really bow out to get to that width. Hopefully I'm explaining that correctly. Anyway, it's exacerbated because your load isn't the same across the footprint of that tire at that point anyway. So anyway, again, that's where I like to see them for street use. Also, you're going to have a little bit stiffer sidewall with the higher pressure, and that's going to aid in handling. It's just going to be a bit more predictable. And again, a lot of guys try to cheat the tire pressure down, and it doesn't really ever work out well, especially in the handling part of it. Be surprised, normal drag radials actually handle pretty well if you keep pressure in them. Anyway, hopefully that answers the question. Skid's saying, good evening, sir. Got the bald guy with the shades and the arm flex. I like it. Kevin's saying, what's up? What's up, man? Let's see. Jordan's saying 410 ratio for his Grand Cherokee, or should I go bigger? Depends on what you're doing with it. But 410 is pretty aggressive for the street, especially with normal stock tire sizes. The problem is things start to get a little bit buzzy, just cruising around. So just know that on the highway, it get a little bit buzzy. Doc's saying, I think he was more interested in the knock safety. We talked about it and we're thinking it would be helpful, although it may not be worth it. To me, it's not really worth it. And let me tell you one big old fat nasty reason why, and that's the corrosiveness of that product. Without getting too deep into it, unless that system is fully evacuated, you're going to have an issue where you've got methanol in the system, and methanol is known to be corrosive. It eats away at pretty much everything. I would probably steer clear of it just for that. I mean, we're not talking about, you're not putting together a, top whatever sportsman class combination that you're going to be, tending to the way that you would, one of those types of combinations. It just doesn't, that type of a system and that type of a just a way to go doesn't really fit the build at all. You can run, frankly, I mean, I would run just normal race gas and call it good. I mean, at that stage of the game, at least it's not going to be corrosive the way that the methanol, ethanol, any other alcohol type fuel would be. And, you don't have to worry about, and again, we're talking that stuff's going to try to eat everything alive. So I don't know. It's just the way that I would go about it. Monterey's checking in saying, Indian Professor B got the flexes on. Kevin saying, just got the Hellcat lower box with a snorkel K&N filter for the 5.7. Very nice. Banshee's asking, what was your hardest car to launch? Man, probably, funny you should ask. Okay, so I was just in it tonight. The hardest car for me to launch would be Foxy. And the reason why Foxy was the hardest car to launch is because Foxy back then wasn't making a lot of power. And this is when it was a 302 car. and I was just learning how to drive manual at the drag strip, and I had been running a 96, my 96 GTS. I forget what the option code was, but it's a base model Mustang. Actually really hard to find, and I've been trying to find one, or had been trying to find one for a while. SN95, roll-up windows, no spoiler, 4.6 car. And that car, it was actually easier than Foxy was to launch. The 302 with the heads and the cam made it just kind of soft, a little bit softer coming out of the hole. And so it was just kind of leading into that learning how to slip the clutch and getting the thing going. By the way, so I was in Foxy tonight. Now that car is a lot easier to launch. In fact, it's real easy to launch. And on the street tires, I've got one of these GPS based, not a draggy, and I need to get a draggy, but it's one of these GPS based 0 to 60, quarter mile, all this other stuff. And for you guys that have asked about what that thing would run just at the drag strip, I doubt that car is ever going to see a drag strip, but on the street, at least according to this contraption, she went 12.2 at 109 miles an hour on the street, on street tires tonight. So that was pretty fun. And what was funny is that it was, and I just wasn't even thinking to video it, because I was literally just there to get data. And I had the car last year on the dyno, and I was making some changes to that tune that I put on the car when it was on the dyno. And I, just figured, okay, well, I'm going to just load this thing up all the way through all 4 gears. And so I just launched it, just feathered into it, grabbed second, grabbed third, grabbed fourth, barked fourth, which I thought was adorable for that car. And then out the back door again, 12.2 at 100, and I think it was at 109 miles an hour. So anyway, the rest of the cars have all been pretty easy to launch, but Foxy at that time, just lower power, significantly lower power than it is now. Just learning the technique on how to slip the clutch was the learning curve that made it more difficult. We're talking about cars that are hard to launch. You've also got cars that were just... So if you're talking about cars that are hard to launch, you've also got to think of cars that were like just not confidence inspiring to launch. That's another big deal for me. All stock, thanks, man. Appreciate that. Didn't have a question, but man, thank you very much, All stock. I appreciate that. Dude, thank you, sir. So all of the automatic vehicles that I've ever driven were kind of C-spot run. It didn't matter how fast they were. I never messed with anything with the bump buttons or anything like that. A couple of two-step cars that had loose converters, you just kind of roll up, hit the button, hit the two-step, and you hit the two-step button, boom, and then let it fly. I mean, that's just drag race only type stuff, though, and that's been a long time since I've even thought about messing with any of that. So again, the automatic cars typically pretty easy. Standard, the Vipers were pretty easy to launch. The only issue with the Vipers and the Corvette, the Z06 that I had, the C5, I would run those cars on ET Streets, which are bias ply tires. And the reason why I would do that is because I was coming out of the hole at about 5,500 RPM. And when I say I'm coming out of the hole at 5,500 RPM, it's, if this is my gas pedal and this is my clutch, I'm holding it tacked up, ready to go. It's right, and I'm just literally, as my foot's coming off the clutch, I'm feeling how the car and how the chassis, the nose will come up on the car, and the second it starts coming up, I'm engaging the clutch. It's kind of like you're using it as a traction, but I am on the floor with that throttle, and I'm just gauging and just feeding power in with the clutch. It's not the best on parts. especially when you're hitting it with a 150 or 200 shot out of the hole. Those scenarios, you actually basically just end up sidestepping the clutch. But the reason why you would do all of that with the bias ply tires, the bias ply tires absorb a lot of that shock. So anytime I would try to run a set of drag radials, there was always a chance of getting some chatter and some wheel hop, and that's never really a good thing. But anyway, hopefully that answers the question. I never really had one that was hard, other than, Foxy when I was learning. But it was a cool question because I was literally just in the car tonight, so that was fun. VA is saying, well, speaking about tires, what do you think about the MT Street comps? Actually, pretty decent tire. We got a lot of rain, and I hate changing tires through the rain. I got a stock 392. Do you think those tires will hold it? And track. They're not a track tire, but they'll do all right for your 392. Just feed the power in. Remember the walking cadence that I always try to teach guys at the drag strip. It's that 1 second roll into the throttle for the 392s. Basically, it goes 1001. So you basically load the chassis up. Don't worry about a launch RPM. Practice just loading the chassis up and feeling what 1500 RPM basically feels like when you're foot braking the car. But the main idea is just to kind of load the chassis, load your transmission, have everything slightly loaded, not like tweaked over or torqued over. Doesn't going to work like that. Once you have it loaded, it's 1001 to the floor. A lot of guys will go 1001 to the floor. And what they're doing is the first part of that roll into the throttle is to get it to load the rear end. And then once they see and feel the car come up, then they'll go to wide open throttle. I will typically take for granted the fact the car is going to hook. So I'll come into it, basically I'll get to about half throttle a little bit quicker and then go to full throttle. It takes practice, but you'll definitely get it down. I mean, it's nothing like, trying to figure out how to play My Name is Mud by Primus on a bass guitar. It's not that freaking difficult. But once you get the hang of it, then it's just second nature. I mean, you can't help but do it every time. So, but that tire at the drag strip, I mean, it's a street tire. It's going to do better than like a set of stock tires, but you're not going to have the confidence to just get in there and stand on the gas and get out there and run a number. You are going to have to drive that car out of the hole with those tires. Dr. is saying what size, he's asking what size tire on that Grand Cherokee. We did 410s in his Grand Cherokee with a 33-inch tall tire, and that makes a huge difference as far as will a gear work. It's how big is the tire. That affects your final effective gear ratio. Allstock saying, hey, do you do tuning support local? If so, how can I get in touch with you? I really don't. There's a couple of Hellcats that I'll play with for guys, a couple of 392 cars that I'll help out with, but it's typically just friends of mine. If I've got to do something for, like if Doc Div says, hey, I've got a guy that's going to be in Houston, I need some data logs. Can you take a look at this? Make some track adjustments, something like that. I'll do that. Alex needs some help with that. I have no problem doing that. But I typically don't do a lot of tuning support for like customers because that's not what I do. It's not a shop that I have. I don't want to take on that responsibility or the liability. So I do what I do for fun, and I don't like getting tied in with tuning. Michael's asking, what are your thoughts on 392 to 426 conversion? Damn, how do I answer this question without making an ass out of myself? So the thing with the 426, I like it. Okay, first of all, it's great. What's not to love? I mean, you're putting together a large or a larger cubic inch stroker small block with a killer set of heads, and at this stage of the game, it doesn't matter what intake you put on it, it's gonna run good. What's not to love? The problem with the 426 is that it's not enough of a more above and beyond where you're coming from with the 392. So 392 to 426 isn't, what is it, like 10%? That's not a lot. And yeah, it's more, but you can kind of get there without going to that extreme in terms of making power. 426s are torqueier, which is cool. And for a street application, they're actually a lot of fun. But I would caution you to make sure that you kind of sort of stick with the recipe here. Depending on what you are looking to do with the car, the 426 can end up being more of a pain in your ass, and you may end up being a little bit disappointed with the results. Let me tell you the reason why. First of all, it's cost. Those things are not cheap. All the labor that's involved in Doc Diff, you can back me up, at least if I'm off or somewhat off on hours for labor, correct me, but R&R on an engine, first of all, you got to get the thing out of there. And so you've got at least for removal and replacement. In other words, if you were just to walk up to the car, pull the engine out, stare at it for a minute, take the engine, put it back in, actually going to be dropping the cradle more than anything else, but you get the idea. You're looking at 12 hours per side on that. So you're looking at 24 hours just to get the engine out and put it back into the car, give or take. Then you're going to have machine work. That's going to be another $2,400, give or take. And so you've got all of these labor costs that are going to eat your lunch. And so with all the labor costs that are going to be involved, then you've got the parts themselves. And to do it right, you're going to already be deep into this thing for crank, pistons, rods, ring pack, labor to file fit the rings. By the way, ring gap would be like 26 on the top ring, 27, 28 thousandths on the bottom ring. That's just if you plan on running boost or hitting it with a shot of dope or just, building it the right way, that's where you're going to want to be. Give or take. Again, some builders like a little bit more, some a little bit less, but that's kind of the pivot number. I can go on and on with this. I can bore you to tears, but the reality is that there's so much labor that's involved in this and expense and everything else that's involved with it, that you kind of look at it and you go, well, damn, and you're never going to get that money back. I get it. There's an ass for every seat and a seat for every ass. Great. But when you look at what you could get out of the car with just a Pro Charger, and I'm not even a biggest fan of Pro Charger systems for 392s, but the reality is you're going to pick up by, the way the crow flies, you're going to pick up about 130 to 150 horsepower to the rear wheels that you're not going to get with that 426. It's plain and simple. And you can talk about torque and drivability and all this other stuff. And you can take your car, put a Pro Charger on it. It's going to cost you a decent amount of money, but here's the twist. Chances are you're not going to keep this car for the rest of your life. You can pull the supercharger off of the car, sell it along, and even though it may be, if it is, more expensive to put the blower on the car, it is going to be less expensive on the backside because you can then sell that kit along. You can buy a used kit. That's the other thing, is people talk about the cost of these things, and I'm always talking about looking at the backside of this thing in terms of costing and where you're going to be recouping. You can buy used kits. Most guys don't have the kits on their cars more than about a year or two anyway. Get the kit in, send it off, have it gone through by Pro Charger. I forget the cost on that, but it's a cost that's involved. Keep the oil in it, you're good to go. And again, you can sell those kits. So the 426 as a standalone modification, I just can't really get behind. In other words, if someone were to come to me and say, man, I just want a 426, I would probably talk him out of it. Now, the script gets completely flipped if this is a situation where man, the engine's got to come out of the car anyway. They're going to stay naturally aspirated. This is something that they want to do for maybe a race class, or their kink is that they love having a, just a high winding, larger cubic inch engine. Then yeah, go for it. I mean, 426, 440. I mean, either way, don't worry about the longevity and reliability and all that other stuff. It'll be fine. I mean, besides, it's hard to talk about longevity and reliability and all of this other stuff when you're talking about an engine that you're going to be beating on mercilessly. All right. So just know that coming into it. But 426, 421, 411, 4 whatever, you're going to call it a 426 either way. So don't worry about the final displacement. It's 426 adjacent. All right. Believe me, there's a lot of 430s. There's a lot of 422s. There's a lot of those kits running around that guys are calling 426s when, anyway, that game's been played by the real manufacturers for years anyway, so don't worry about doing that. What would my combination be? That's kind of the thing. It would all depend on what you're planning on doing with the 426. If it's a street car, stick with the stock intake, put a cam in it that's going to be fairly decent size, but a little bit of a tighter lobe separation angle. Try to get you some of the mid-range and just have the thing sound good and do a lot of cool things, but have it to where you can still use the stock converter and it doesn't sit there and buck and just make an ass of itself too much on the street. In that case, it would be a fun bit of an upgrade, and all it really does, so it tilts the curve. That's all a stroker does. You're not going to get, and this is the other thing too, cam for cam, you're not going to get more horsepower out of a stroker motor typically, but you will get more torque. And so if you look at the dyno sheet, it's just like, from y'all's point of view, it'll go, and it'll kick up the torque. And then out towards the top end, it'll start to fall off a little bit in some cases. So, but with the Hemis, they got a lot of cylinder head, so it's really hard to overtax that. They're good combinations. I wouldn't recommend a stroker motor for somebody unless they were dead set on having naturally aspirated. They plan on keeping the car long term, and or they want something that's just naturally aspirated that they can take to the track to wring out. And I get that part of it too. But anyway, my combination be for the track, I mean, obviously the sniper intake, significantly more aggressive camshaft. You're going to have aftermarket pistons. You can bump the compression up to 12-to-1 at that point. Is it going to be street gas, pump gas? You're going to run this thing on corn? What are we talking about? All of that's going to come into play, but the problem is that when you get to that point, all the guys start looking at the bottom of the page. Biggest camshaft, biggest this, biggest that. That's great, and it looks good on a dyno, but believe me, if this thing's going to spend any real time on the street, all the things that sound cool in a 5-second or a 20-second YouTube video, those are the things that you get sick of within about 5 weeks and at most 20 weeks. All right. And that's another reason why I try to steer guys a little bit away from that, is because if you get too racy with the thing, you're going to end up getting sick of it, and you're going to be chasing this thing with parts until you're just blue in the face. So anyway, they're fun, they're cool, I like driving them, but if they're done right, they're good. If they're not, then it's not any fun. Dr. was saying, wait, we got 456s in his Grand Cherokee. Again, all stock. Thank you very much, man. I appreciate it. Ruben's saying, loves his draggy, neat little device. I need to get an actual draggy. I don't think the app that I have is fairly accurate. The funny thing about it is that at the drag strip, when I tried it out, it was dead on accurate. I don't know how often it's accurate. I don't know what the margin of accuracy is with it. I think 12.2 might have been a little bit optimistic, but it doesn't really matter. Like I say, the mile an hour is usually fairly accurate. It's got a weird frame rate to it. That's the only thing that gets on my nerves about it, is that the frame rate's kind of slow. And I know that with Sierra, the frame rate is such that it doesn't pick up the actual mile an hour, because I'm looking at the speedometer as it's going through the sweep, and it'll say Sierra's gone like a 14.2, or no, I'm sorry, a 14.8 at 83 miles an hour, and I'm looking at the speedometer and I know what the correction is, and I'm clipping 91 as it fires off that quarter mile. So I mean, it's like the mile an hour just does not jive sometimes, but it was real accurate at the drag strip. So I don't know. Oh, Doc saying, speaking of draggy, I need to find mine. I think I put it with that Kindle. Actually, the Kindle's there, and so you get that to you. I don't know what I did with it. Put it in one of those spots so I won't forget. Yeah, I know the feeling. Oh, Modern Red saying his draggy's. I've heard good things about the draggy. He's saying the same thing. It's within about half a tenth. That's really good. I mean, you can't get closer than that. But I need to actually get one, and that's next on the things to buy. And for me, it's data acquisition. It's the funny thing with me. I am so beyond, like, it's funny. I get it. It's fun. You get to get the numbers, and the numbers mean something. But to me, it's just, are the changes making an improvement? To me, I would use a draggy the same way that I would use a dyno. And as a matter of fact, the old way, and this is something that a lot of folks, and I had forgotten all about this. There's a lot of stuff when you're around this. There's like old technology, transitional technology, stuff that's obsolete and everything else. But the old way to, you still do this, it's just more sophisticated now, I suppose. But the old way to test if the mods you made were making any real difference is that you had your buddy sitting over there with a stopwatch, and it would be you and your buddy, and you would get the car to say 20 miles an hour, and you go, all right, you ready, Frank? All right, Frank, let's do this. And you floor the throttle, and you get to a certain mile an hour, and you click your stopwatch, and then you get to your target mile an hour, and then you hit the stopwatch again. And it was, did the car make the sweep? And you would start it, in second gear or whatever you're doing. Anyway, I do the same thing for timestamps on when I'm data logging. So it just makes things easier if you've got something that can say, that thing went, 14 flat. Okay, well, that's better, or, oh, that's worse, than trying to go back and count down the timestamp. But I still do the same thing. I still timestamp the modifications, and that's why it was so surprising when we were doing the cold weather testing with Revlon with filter versus no filter at all, and even the timestamp was slightly slower with no filter at all. It's like, dude, the data shows that it's making less power, and the timestamp is agreeing with the data. It doesn't get any more concrete than that. It's literally the whole reason why we were out there doing that. So that was a lot of fun for me. I really enjoyed that. It was eye-opening for me too. Kevin saying, I just got a 17 RT Charger, pretty stock, just 10 series Flowmasters, Hellcat lower box with the snorkel, 275 40/20 on the back, 245s up front. Think I can get a 13 with that? Yeah, should be able to. I don't see any reason why not. You're gonna need a little bit of air, but yeah, that's a 13-second car. Well, all those 5.7 cars can run 13s. So yeah, you should be. I mean, depending on what your DA is, what altitude you live at, and all that. But yeah, I see them run 13s down here all the time. Oh yeah, and then Modern Red saying, hey Kevin, I had pretty much the same setup with my 16 RT Challenger about 2 years ago. I was running high to mid 13s. Yeah, we see them down here. We see them in the mid 13s all day, every day, twice on Sunday. I mean, they're fun. This is the thing. Yes, it will run 13s. And here's some homework for you. This is what I want you to do if you haven't done it already. Go look up, I don't know, basically pick anything from the golden era in the 60s, any of the 60s muscle cars that you would have actually seen in mass quantities on the street. You know, you're talking 351 Cleveland Torinos, you're talking about, I don't know, 383 Roadrunners, which the world was infested with back then. Look up 396 Chevelles. Look up all of those types of sedan type hot rods you can compare your car to. You'll find you're right there with the best of them. So 13's a good number, man. 13. Okay, so for me, guys, look, I always talk about that fun factor, the fun zone. You always have to have a bit of a barometer when you're talking about modern cars, because modern cars are so just like, they're fast to a fault, and it's really obnoxious and obscene in a few ways, just how fast modern cars are. And what folks don't remember is that a 13-second car was the benchmark standard. This is on street tires. I understand all that, but a 13-second car, or a car that would maybe crowd the 12s, on a slick with a little bit of race prep, some, weight reduction or whatever, 1320 car, something like that. And no pun intended with the drag race thing, quarter mile. Anyway, when you're talking about that type of performance, you're in rarefied air already once you start getting to that. That you're in what they would call supercar status back then. So yeah, 13s are just plenty fast as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, it starts the fun zone for me, like a like a 14.5 to 15.0 would be the far slow range, but it'll still do a crazy nice burnout, and you can have a lot of fun with that. You started out there, and then maybe as fast as like an 1180. That's the spectrum for being able to get out and just have a lot of fun. And you don't get me wrong, it'll go from 0 to damn near get you killed lickety split. Okay, don't take what I'm saying the wrong way, but you can have all of your fun under 110 miles an hour with those types of cars. In other words, that power to weight ratio spectrum that I'm talking about. We live in an era where 10s are the new 12s. And what that means is that used to be a 12-second car was a extremely respectable street car, and it would hold its own. And all of the fast cars, like what you would consider fast, were 12-second cars. The cars that were really fast were in the 11s. Say 1150 car was unheard of as a street car, and you kind of see where this is going. And that's why 10s, now everything runs 10, so there's nothing special about it, but it's still considered to be a fast car. And the fun cars seem to get pushed to the side, which is a little bit of a bummer for me. But yes, anyway, how I went off on that soapbox. Oh, Doc saying I like the valve in the background. I've got a fuel injector connection and a Texas Speed one I can add to the collection, maybe even a JBA. Cool, man. Yeah, I'm all into that. So yeah, I've got my the Pennzoil one is over here. There's a Auto Best Parts thing back behind me. I don't know, I've got all kinds of stuff like that. So yeah, I'm always looking for that. So yeah, hit me up. Thank you though. So Madeire's asking, how much power were your snakes making? So my Red Viper would, on a 248 dyno jet, would put down, do I still have that? I had, it may not be here. That one would put down 575 to the rear wheels. And that car was naturally aspirated. My Gray Viper was stock. I think that one might have been like a 390 to 400 horse to the rear wheels. These are all Gen 2s. That car is just really pretty. I just hate that I wrecked it, but that was a really pretty, really nice car. My ACR, on the other hand, that's where we got a little bit stupid. So it would put down, I'm sorry, no, the red car put down 5.25. The black car would put down 575 on motor initially. And played around with that for a little bit, and then went a little bit more aggressive with the cam. We're trying to get it to 600, but it never made it. Like 585, I think 585, 587, and then we just started throwing nitrous on it. So it went from 587 to 740 something with a 200 shot. I'm trying to remember. And that was I remember I was annoyed with that because it didn't hit 750. And so we hit it with a 250 shot. It was like 775. And then we hit it with a 300 shot. And that's basically where it stayed for a long time. And I might have made a little over 800 or something like that to the rear wheels. And then the car was like that for a while. We did some intake porting, a couple of other things, direct port nitrous at that. No, did we do direct port at that point? I don't think it ever went on the dyno after that with the normal throttle body style nitrous setup, but then it went to port injection, and that's when shit got real. And it picked up about 25 horsepower to the rear wheels, just switching to the port nitrous injection. Anyway, we got it up just south of 900 horsepower, and that's pretty much where it stayed. It just depended on the dyno that it was on. So the nitrous thing was fun for a while. I used to do a lot of roll racing, and that's when roll racing, see, this would have been circa 19, like between it would have been 2002, 3, 4, 5, right around in there. Roll racing was kind of coming into its own, and so that's what we used those cars for quite a bit. It had been Vipers, Vets, Supras, all of that. But that's back when a car making 800 to the wheels was like, oh my God, that's, monster status. And that's when, so the Supra at that stage of the game would have been, let me think about this. Most of the Supras back then were about 750 to 850 to the rear wheels on spray. And then the trick was trying to get one to make around 850 just boost, and then hit it with about a 200 or a 250 shot to get it to 1,000 horsepower, which is hysterical. Nowadays, and that 1,000 horsepower was the goal. Nowadays, it's like you can't even play the game unless you're really throwing, 12, 1,400 horsepower with the rear wheels. But dude, back then, 800 was a big number, and I ended up dialing mine way back. In fact, I pulled the nitrous off of it, sold that intake. Actually, I take that back. I traded it plus some money, so I kind of sold it for a stock intake. I did all my own porting on that, swapped everything over, throttle bodies, everything else. And then from there, I just ran it naturally aspirated after that. It was plenty fast at that point. Put the, when it was naturally aspirated, before I had a 354 gear, put the 354 gear back in it, and just had a really fun, car to play around with on the street. So that'll give you an idea. The car was a freaking monster. And, if I had another one, I wouldn't go that route with it again. It just is not the right platform to try to go nuts with. They are criminally pretty to look at, but just not the most fun thing in the world to drive. And to that point, we were starting to get more into closed circuit racing. So, just all the outright power thing just wasn't any fun. But I tell you what, I wish we had a draggy back then, because we would run the 100 to 200 mile an hour hits with those cars, and they did not waste any time getting to the 2 bill mark. But that's when you're doing a lot of really stupid stuff. Let's see. Madeira's asking, hey, what's up? Dr. Diff is going to throw the numbers back at me on the labor. We were talking about 426, and is it worth it to go 426? What are my thoughts on that? And I was trying to get just the numbers down for like putting a bid together. So long block swap calls for 36.6 hours, if I remember correctly, and probably $5,000 at the machine shop to do it right with the bore and studding. That's not one single part yet. So to give you an idea of what he's talking about, you're looking at basically somewhere, and this is giving you a deal. Like this is giving you like a smoking deal. Well, let's get away from the smoking deal numbers. A real number here is about $10,000 worth of labor going into this thing. And you haven't even started to do anything. Like you just know that you're going to have to pay a lot of that labor up front. And most shops will do that. They'll tell you, look, you got to pay for your parts, and you're going to be paying for a certain amount of labor as these stages are reached. And some will split it up in half, some will split it up in thirds, but I mean, that's how the shop's going to be managing their cash flow. And so you're going to be out all this money, and you ain't even going to have a car to talk about. So you got to pay for parts plus part of the labor up front. And that's how you got to do it nowadays. Dr. Dave was asking, how much do you think the 392 will support with some ring gap? They've got good rods and crank, but pistons suck because of the ring being so high on the piston. My thoughts versus 426 build budget option. So nobody will do this. So what is, and you already know what I'm going to ask, but what is the tried and true way to make a junkyard LS be a freaking nightmare for pretty much anybody around you? And what you do is you get a 5.3, clapped out more than likely. You get a 5.3, tear it apart, open up the ring gap to like 26 thousandths, 27 thousandths on that little bitty bore, throw it back together, have everything, have all your ring packs 180 degrees from each other. Go 26 on the top or 25 on the top, 27 on the bottom, however you want to do it, 25 and 25. It doesn't matter. You're just opening up ring gap. And then throw the kitchen sink at it in terms of boost. The guys that were in the know back in the day that actually built the things to last any length of time, that's what they would do. But there are plenty of guys that went out there and just, threw the boost at whatever it was. They'd swap over heads and cam, and that would be it. Well, the 392 with ring gap would support plenty of power. But if you're going to tear a 392 apart to that level, you'd almost just go, okay, well, let me get a better set of pistons while I'm here anyway, and then ring gap those pistons. Voila, problem is solved. And you've got about 8 really neat looking ashtrays at that point. That's really the thing here. The problem is that it's not that you can't do that with a Hemi. The problem is that the cost of the damn thing is going to be astronomical. They just didn't put 6.4s in pickup trucks and SUVs the way that they did put the 5.3, for example. So that it's a cost thing. You're going to be paying so much if you're going to have to get a replacement 6.4. Cost is just prohibitive at that point. So, you're going to build it. Well, you're going to be building it with all these parts, and that's one of the big issues that the general customer would be to, do you tear this thing apart and not put upgraded pistons and rods, or at least pistons in the thing? I wouldn't let them leave the shop with the stock pistons still in the thing. But if you own a shop and you don't have a problem going that route, then yeah, I think they would actually manage quite a bit of power. Again, it's just keeping the ring gap wide. I would stay on the far side. In terms of thousandths per bore size, in inches. I would probably go 6.5 thousandths per inch of bore at that point. I know or 5.5, I should say. It sounds like a lot, but at least get to 6 for the second ring. I mean, I would probably be going pretty nuts with that. But again, if it were mine, I'd probably go 26 or 27 and 27 if it were mine. Doug goes, I got a good cam for a 426. Yeah, you do. BB78 saying, hey, Professor, I should have my 6.1 back from the shop next week with cam headers and tune. How can I send the tune to have another Mopar shop look over it? It depends on the tuning software that your tuner is using or that you have in your logs. But if you've got HP tuners, then you would have the tune file itself, and you would just send the tune file as an attachment, just like you would any other attachment in an email. So that's how you would do that, and just get with the shop that you would want to have take a look at it. Doctor is saying 28 watching and 4 likes. I'll hit the like button. Yeah, hit the like button, guys. Don't forget, like, subscribe, share, hit the bell, do all of that stuff. The bell thing is actually one of the more important things you can do. It's not good. You can't, nowadays, you can't just subscribe. You've got to hit the bell and have your notifications on. Let's see. Oh, BB saying the shop I have the car at is reputable, but they do more than just Mopar, so wanting a Mopar specific to shop to look over the tune if possible. I would say Doc Differential's in. Just email it to drdifferential@gmail.com and he can take a look at it. Oh, Sean's asking, sorry I missed it. What did you run? What was the config DA? So I ran, the best I ran last night was a 1058 at like 128-ish miles an hour. We were fighting the heat, obviously. Fighting heat, fighting some heat soak, and I was real happy with the way the car ran. DA was 27 ridiculousness. The first hit that I made, that hit that's on Houston Raceway Park's Instagram page, that hit was the first hit, and that track was greasy. But I mean, nothing against Houston Raceway Park. You can't get around the fact that the track temps were probably, again, surface of the sun hot. I mean, it's just ridiculously hot. Let's see. But yeah, the car ran great. I had a lot of fun with it. And again, everybody was in such a good mood too, because they're so happy to be back at the track. Doctor was saying, if it's HP Tuners format, I'll look at it. That's all I use. Diablo is junk, just my opinion. A lot of people don't use Diablo. Frederick saying, what's poppin', B? Got the ball, got the shades, and the arm flex. I like it. Oh, Doc was saying, I know when I was a teenager, if you had an 11 or 12-second car, you were the big dick on the street. My 79 Camaro back in the day would walk away from anything. It ran 1138s. Yeah, it's not like, that's crazy how fast stuff is now. Sam saying, man, how many fast drop tops are there? They're all fast nowadays, it seems like. Randy saying, pit crew to 70 super stock Hemi Challenger that was loud and nasty running low 10s back in 76 and 77. You run that with air and drove it to the track. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. But it took a super stock Hemi Challenger to do that. And we're out running, like last night, running mid-10s in a car that I drove to the track, drove it back up here to swap tires, drove it back out to the drag strip, was making hits, AC on the way out there. Nice, fun little drive out to the drag strip. It's just crazy just how far things have gone and how far they've come, I should say. KC saying, what up, Mason? Got the arm flex. I like it. Sam saying, comes from the diesel world. Does anybody do tunes that can be changed on the fly? I have no, like a 5 to 7 position. I have no clue on the diesel stuff. On the gas side, not really anymore, but it's funny you ask because Cal Edit software allows for the switching of tunes with a switch, but that's all very old technology for very obsolete automotive computers. A9L, strategies, EEC4, EEC5 strategies. So although there are some out there, they are really not geared to the modern cars, at least, which is kind of a bummer, but because that would be super cool if you could still do that. But a lot of that's too cumbersome, and besides, a lot of the times, the Switch and having added hardware gives some guys a bit more of a pressure point, and the ability to just be able to go in and load a tune out of their laptop is a lot more attractive. That is, until you break your laptop like I did, because I'm a freaking idiot. Hey, Tobias is in. I got the arm flex. I like it. Anthony's asking, head-to-head 426-71 Challenger versus 2021 392 Challenger. Who would win? Tire for tire. Okay. This is how you have to look at that. So tire for tire, and stock for stock. In other words, you put a drag pack on both cars. The modern 392 is gonna beat the Challenger. That's just how it is. Whether it's a Charger or a Challenger versus anything with a 426, if it's a street Hemi, it's not going to have the gear multiplication that the modern car does. And quite honestly, it's not making the same power, although it will be lighter. Now, all that being said, that 426 could have been optioned with any number of gear ratios back then. So even a street Hemi could get 456 gears in that Dana 60. So you've got to know that, okay, in the quarter mile, like we are going to boil this thing down to its quarter mile performance. A 426 with a good tune-up on quality race gas would give that, I don't know, let's say it's a 1320, because we're comparing, cream of the crop. We're comparing the top of the line Challenger. Let's compare the top of the line NA Challenger, call it 1320. Let me give you an idea. Last night, that 1320 no-seat car in the heat, in the swamp that we were running in, he damn near ran 11s last night. I would dare say that even on a slick with a good tune-up, that street Hemi is going to have a hell of a hard time covering that number. It's just how it is. It's going to get close, but it's not going to cover that number. And I'm only talking about quarter mile performance here. I'm not getting into the fact that car, to run that number, is now a trailer queen, or you've got a top speed of 50 on the way home, and you better have brought gas jugs with you, because you ain't going to make it. Now modified, or let's say race prepped 426, and I'm not talking about like super stock Dodge race prepping. I'm talking about solid lifter cam, better spring pack, different intake manifold. Could go the twin fours, but a single four is actually going to be better for distribution. Headers, the whole bit, the actual, to convert it, day two modification to convert it to a race Hemi spec. The heads were all the same, the block was the same, and all that. In that respect, then yeah, you're probably looking at a car that'll run deep into the 11s. But again, you're going to be running a lot of gear, a lot of converter, and it's going to be a car that you're just not going to want to live with daily. And here's the thing. This is what I've been saying for the longest time. I've dynoed Hemis, guys. I've dynoed the old 426. Ain't nothing to write home about. I mean, they dyno what a 425 horsepower, 415, 435 horsepower engine is going to put down on the dyno. I think it was like hold on, let me think about this for a minute. What were they putting down? Like 380, 370 was some of the better ones that I had seen. Most of them would be doing really good to put those kind of numbers down. And those were the ones with the headers and with other parts on there. The only stock one I ever dyno was like 330 horsepower. 340 horsepower to the rear wheels. This is an automatic car, but still, I mean, they're not putting down a ton of power. And to that point, there's a reason why a lot of Hemis didn't sell. People talk about Hemi cars back then in a weird way. They're revered for some reason, but it's one of those things where, I don't see a reason to revere. The market did not agree that the Hemi was the best engine combination for the street. That's why there are so many 440, 375 horse cars turned loose into the world, is because people would drive the Hemi and they were kind of a turd to drive in general versus a 440. So really, and this is in terms of throttle response, tip-in torque, the whole bit. The only time the Hemi would actually start doing well would be way up in the upper RPM range, and even then, it wasn't like it was just running away from the 440. I mean, it was, but by that time, the 440 would have already shifted. One fun fact between you talking about the 440 and the Hemi, by the way, was the port velocity. And I've got this article somewhere. I've even got, by the way, if you really want to know where the 426 Hemi lied, or lays, I should say, however you want to say it, just look up 1971 426 Hemi SAE net horsepower ratings. It doesn't take long to find the number, and you will be shocked to notice how low that number is. It's real low, as a matter of fact. And it's low, not because there was any changes made to the engine. It was the change that they made to how the engine was rated. And it goes from 426. I'll just go ahead and tell you what it is. It goes from 426 to 350 horsepower with no changes made to that engine. So just know that coming into it. Also, that Hemi, the street Hemi at 10.5 to 1 compression ratio is not really all that hot of an engine. It's relying specifically on low pumping losses and just really, which is to say, really good airflow in and out of that engine to make power. They didn't have very high compression ratios, even by the standard of the day. So that kind of answers the question. The 392's got about a full half point higher compression ratio than that Hemi, than the 426, and it's got a much more efficient combustion chamber design that it's working with. A lot more quench, easier to get airflow in and out of these modern heads than it was back then. Lots of things going for that 392. So let's see. Also, like saying HP Tuners is supposed to have a Bluetooth option coming, which may include the tune switch option. That would be cool if they do. Sam saying, I wonder how a 360 with a 671 and 373s would run. I mean, all of the 350, 360, 340 size engines with a 671, they do great up to about 4,000 RPM typically on pump gas. And that's really where the true lobed roots style blowers, they do the absolute best at moving a lot of air at the lower RPM range, but they get real inefficient real fast at the higher RPM range. So for, street friendly boost numbers of like 6 to 7 PSI, I mean, they're going to just kind of follow the curve basically at that point. It'll make, a typical 360, let's say it's a 300 horsepower 360, which would be a fairly decent street setup for a 360. You throw a blower on it and it'll pick up another 100 horsepower. So, and about another 100 foot-pounds of torque, but it's like right now torque. Dads is asking, how accurate is the Uconnect data as far as 0 to 60s? It's fairly accurate as far as I can tell. Oh, Andy's saying, I forgot all about the rear axles they had back then. Yeah. Oh, and so to that point, okay, so we were talking about those cars in a bubble. Okay, we're talking about going from a dead stop to 1,320 feet plus a foot of rollout. We're not talking again about the fact that that car, talking about the old school car, is going to be all but unlivable and in any other circumstance other than at the drag strip, maybe driving the thing to go get ice cream, going to the Burger Hut, whatever, that kind of stuff. Yeah, okay, you can get away with it, but I mean, dude, it's you don't even know it, and you're spoiled beyond all complete recognition by today's automobiles. They are all so eerily fast and yet efficient and quiet and clean and everything that comes with it. It's crazy how fast and clean and everything these cars are. And then you look by comparison, right? I mean, by comparison, it blows my mind, So anyway, big difference there. Oh, Dad's saying, or the built-in system in the car. No, they're actually pretty accurate. I can tell you that the quarter-mile timers are accurate. Dr. Diff is checking out. Going to watch a movie. Y'all have fun. Thanks for the info. Thanks, brother. Appreciate you, man. So I'm saying 440 I hear was more reliable and less of a hassle. The downside to the 440, if you want to call it this, or any of the big block Mopar heads that don't have Hemi written across the freaking valve cover, they are not high flowing heads. Now you can make them high flowing. You can get aftermarket heads that flow plenty of air, but the configuration, the shape, the ports, they're just not awesome. They're like having a really good set of small block heads on your big block. So that's why that port velocity was so high in the 440 versus the 426. And again, the port velocity is just how fast the air is moving. Like if you had a speedometer on the air coming into that or through that port coming onto that intake valve. That's really what you're looking at in terms of what's the port velocity, how fast is the air going through there. At 4,700 RPM, so less than 5,000 RPM for the 440 versus 6,200 RPM for the 426, to have the same port velocity, the same speed of air going through the ports would take 4,700 for the 440, 6,200, if memory serves me correctly, 62, 64, right around in there for the Hemi. That's why, that port velocity is what builds the stacking effect. That's what helps you build torque. That's where the power is coming from. And at some point, you run into pumping losses. It doesn't matter how much harder you pull down, the port velocity doesn't go up as high. Same thing with, you see that with head flow numbers, right? At some point that for each amount of valve lift, your flow will just not get you much more flow. It's because you're literally running out of efficiency with that head. That's where those two engines kind of fall in line with each other. And that's why the 440 was so much more popular and more reliable. You didn't have to rev the thing to make power. Its shift point on a 440 is basically $5,000. The cars were rated at 375 at 46, 45, 4,700, whatever the number was. There was no real overrun with them, and they were actually a little bit overrated even by the standard of the day. So, a 370, 375 horse 440 was really more like 350, 360 horsepower. So, just something to consider. And they would give a Hemi all it could handle all the way down the drag strip, with the guy in the Hemi praying that he's got enough real estate to go around the 440 before the end of the pass. Sam saying it sucks when you can't man it through a red light without blowing through the converter. Yeah, a lot of these cars now don't even need it. You just blow through the tires because you're making that much power. Let's see. LMH is saying, great podcast. Thank you very much. What are your thoughts on 600 wheel horsepower car going from 1 3/4 headers to 3-inch high flow cats that tie into a 2.5-inch cat back? Am I suffocating the car's exhaust? Not really. Not so much. I mean, you're giving up a little bit, but you got to remember you've got 1 3/4 inch headers, so you're already a little bit small, but that's okay. I mean, it depends on really what the application is. 600 horsepower is going to tax a set of 1 3/4, but you've got a 3-inch set of high flow cats. I'm assuming you've got a 3-inch collector going into a set of 3-inch high flow cats, and then a 2.5-inch cat back after that. If you're doing that because of packaging constraints, then it's really not going to make that much of a difference whether it would or wouldn't suffocate it, right? I mean, it is what it is because of how it's got to be packaged. I would prefer to see 1 7/8. This is a naturally aspirated car. I'd rather see the 1 7/8 on there. But again, 1 3/4 is not going to hurt you. In fact, 1 3/4 is going to be fine up to probably 600. So we're talking about 600 wheel horsepower. I'm guessing it's a dyno jet. You're going to be good up to about 5,300, 5,500 RPM with the 1 3/4 inch headers. After that, yeah, your bigger headers would absolutely help you. But again, it's only way up there. And of course, it doesn't matter. Partial throttle, yeah, the 1 3/4 would actually be a little bit more responsive on your lower airflow situations. In other lower airflow needed situations, 1 3/4 would be a little bit more responsive. And the 2.5-inch catback, again, you're not going to tax the flow of that exhaust system, even at 600 wheel horsepower, until, and again, it depends on how you're getting to that number. If we're talking about supercharged or naturally aspirated, what have you, but let's say it's a pro-charged car, you're not going to be taxing that 2.5-inch exhaust all that much. I mean, you might be looking at maybe between the entire system as a whole, 3-inch cats, we're probably talking about 3-inch metal substrate cats here. You might be taxing it to the tune of 16 horsepower. 17 horsepower. It sounds like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, it's really not, especially if you're still running cats, you're keeping it green, and you want to retain a lot of that partial throttle tip-in torque and all of that you're going to get with those 1 3/4. So, let's just do this. Let's say that your number one goal for the car is to take it to the drag strip and you're trying to get a number out of the car. I would definitely swap out the parts. If you're working around packaging constraints, fitment constraints, things like that, I'd say leave it where it's at. But I mean, you are on the low limit of what that will be able to manage. Anthony's saying 1972 is net. That is correct. However, in other markets, they were already looking at net horsepower numbers in 1971, which is interesting too. Yeah, 72 was, everybody went. In fact, they would do gross and net in 71, and they actually had some gross and net numbers, I think, memory serves me correct, in 1970. But you would see the big switch happen after 1971. So into 72, 3, 4, and up, yes, that was all net. But check it out. You will find net numbers on that Hemi in 1971. And here's the funny thing about that. There were other net numbers on the Hemi. So, and this goes back to my gross versus net horsepower video that I did a while back. If you ever get a chance to check that one out. This is the interesting thing. So 350 horse was the full on net horsepower rating of the 426 Hemi, but there were other net ratings. One of them was 390 horsepower. The 390 horsepower net number had stock manifold. I gotta sit here and remember this. Stock manifolds. It had the had no air cleaner, but it did have the fan. And that was one of the key things. So there were ways that you could call an engine net horsepower rated, but they still were using some of the gross horsepower configurations. So a fan typically was worth 20 to 25 if it was a fixed fan. You had an air cleaner assembly could be worth, 15 horsepower, 10 horsepower, depends on the combination. So there was a lot of things going on with how cars were rated back then, and I wish I could find it. I've got to be able to find this somewhere, but it was the one that I'm talking about right now, that 390 horse net number, because that's actually the very first one that I ever found when I was doing the searches, because I knew that they had the net number. I just had to find it. So anyway, that's another thing that will pop up too. Randy's checking out, saying enjoy your night. Sounds like a good time. Oh, someone saying, yeah, I think I'd want a resto mod than a bone stock classic. Yeah, it depends on the direction of that resto mod. Yeah, Dad's is checking in saying we are too spoiled with how good this stuff is. Oh, Arthur's asking, what are my thoughts on the 68, 69 Mercury Cougar XR7? I think it had a 427. So you couldn't get you could maybe option a 427 in it. 427 is a completely different engine than a 429 or a 428. I love the Mercuries. The Cougars, I mean, dude, one of my favorite, just the way that the car looks, were the Eliminators. I thought those were awesome cars. It was a direct line of sight competitor from, length, width, weight, and all that to the Challenger of the day. So, yeah, love those things. 428 cars, I think you'd have seen a few of those. There was a Boss Eliminator that was a homologation car for SCCA racing. But you also had, you get a 351 Cleveland in the Cougar Eliminator, I believe. So there was a lot of really hot combinations that you could come up with for those Mercs. Arthur Wall's got the bog guy with the flex. I like it. No, getting back to it though. So yeah, took the car to the drag strip in the heat, in the funk, in the swamp. And I got to tell you guys, had an absolute blast with it. And again, the main thing is, I know it's the grossest part of the year, but you got to get out there, get some seat time, get your practice in. It will be fun, I promise. It's, support your local tracks too. And I'm out there primarily trying to get data, but, I'm out there having fun too. It's something that I really enjoy. Do what you love what you do, right? So in this case, it's just primarily getting those datas that I talk so much about. But with that, guys, we're coming up on about an hour and a half. I got to be up early in the morning for Father's Day stuff. So with this, I will say happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. I'm going to wrap it up. Y'all have a great one. Stay safe out there. If you're going to send it, don't bend it. Keep your shiny side up. And we will catch y'all on the next one. That's a wrap. Adios.